Okay, welcome to this webinar. Yes. Welcome to this webinar, everyone. I think we will allow other delegates to join us as we continue. But for the moment, let's start. And I think we can move ahead with this. Good. Welcome again, everyone, to this webinar of the ICA, the International Crime Prevention through Environmental Design Association. This association, the ICA, is a professional non-profit global organization for all things related to CPTED. This webinar is one of the many programs run by the ICA for preventing crime and creating safer places. My name is Tinus Kruger, and I'm the Executive Director of the ICA. I would just like to mention a few administrative issues. Please make sure your microphones and cameras are not activated. You're welcome, like I said, to introduce yourself in the chat. We would really appreciate that. When we have the discussion, please use the Q&A function. There's a Q&A tab where you can post questions and comments. We will really appreciate that as we move along, that you use that. We would really like to invite you to take advantage of the many programs we offer by joining the ICA. You can use the link that you see there on the screen to contact us, or if you have any questions. Before we move further, I would like to make you aware of the conference next year of the ICA in Palm Springs between 11 and 14 May. Please go and have a look on our website. You will be able to find it if you go to the ICA website. Please consider joining us. This promises to be an amazing conference, and we haven't had a really large in-person conference for many years due to COVID and other factors. So we would really like to see everyone there. Then just a bit of a disclaimer, as you can see on the screen. I think the key here is that the views expressed in this presentation belong to our guest speakers, and they do not necessarily reflect the position of the ICA. We as the ICA do not assume legal responsibility for the speakers' statements, the intellectual property, or the information presented today. So let's move on to the webinar. It is my pleasure to welcome all of you, our attendees and our panelists to this webinar. The panelists are Dr. Macarena Rao, the ICA President, Dr. Shamir Rajadurai, the ICA Director, and Dr. Manjari Kapoor, the ICA Vice President, who will be a speaker as well as the moderator. I will now hand over to Manjari to take us through this webinar.
Thank you so much, Tinus, and a warm welcome to the whole world watching us from different parts of the world, whether warm or cold. We extend a warm welcome to all of you joining us now, or those who will be listening to this post this session. The topic today is of special interest to me and our president, because both of us, interestingly, the top 3 people in the main executive committee are from Global South. That means me, Maca, the president, and our office, our executive director, Tinus, who was just speaking to you a little while back. We are all coming from the Global South, and interestingly, heading or steering forward this international organization based on CPTED. Now, what is interesting is that typically all literature that we read of, everything that we know of, also the ICA, originally has originated in the global north. The developed world is what has led the CPTED movement. However, that does not take away from what has been CPTED's significance to the Global South or Global South's role in CPTED movement. And it's an interesting conversation which has been brewing in the background for a long time, personally to me for sure. And we have three of us here representing the Global South, interacting with, I'm hoping, a lot of our audiences from the Global North. And we hope to make this very interesting conversation, bringing the two together, especially in the context of CPTED. So I have the privilege to now start the proceedings with, of course, who better than our own president, Dr. Makarana Rao Vagas. She is an architect from Chile with a master's degree in research and philosophy of architecture in Chile. And she has completed her PhD in architecture and urbanism and has a wide range of experience in urban and public projects in most of Latin America and the Caribbean. She is also the founder, leader of PBK Consulting and is heading the chapter at our ICA chapter in Chile. And now I will hand over to her to first share an interesting insight into the subject, and then we will take it up further. Over to you, Maka.
Thank you, dear Manjari, and hello to everyone. Hello to Dr. Shamir Raya Durai, our ICA director from Malaysia, to Tinus Kruger, our executive director from ICA, and Dr. Manjari Kanakapura, our vice president, and all the attendees together that are here online and who will see the record later. I am very honored to be here and to tell from a first-person perspective my experience applying CPTED in the South Hemisphere since 24 years. It has been a very challenging journey to adapt with cultural context, what is to implement CPTED in the Latin American region mostly. I have a very brief presentation that I will share with you so I can explain better my experience. My presentation talks about the application of CPTED in the Global South Hemisphere. And just to start the talk, I want to highlight a very relevant point that is always present in all the projects I have done and I have shared with my team and other teams in the Global South Hemisphere, is that a city must be safe not only in an objective way, but also a subjective way. And this means that we need to build cities and design cities to reduce crime opportunity, but also to reduce fear perception. In the Latin American region, sadly, it is the most criminogenic region of the world. If we analyze homicide, for example, or other type of crime. So because of that, also the levels of fear of population are very high, very high. So all our CPTED projects deals also with fear perception. That connects directly with quality of life. When you feel fear, you modify your spatial behavior. You prefer, for example, to go to another park, not to that park because someone told you that you can be victim of a crime in that park. And so fear perception is a very sensitive topic. When I was elected ICA president in the year 2017, together with all board members, we developed together the umbrella initiative policy. That is an ICA policy that seeks to articulate different CPTED groups and CPTED practitioners from different parts of the world to get more synergy in our interventions, to exchange in a very more practical way our experiences. And since then, and until now, I'm very happy to say that we have 10 formal chapters in different parts of the world. And because of that, also, next year in Palm Springs, United States, will be the International CPTED Association Conference, organized by the chapter from Canada and United States. What we have discovered with this umbrella initiative is that we can apply CPTED in so many parts of the world, but always it has a local flavor, a very specific accent. And so when you apply CPTED in the global South Hemisphere, it has a global South Hemisphere accent or flavor. We can say that CPTED principles are universal, but they are applied locally. And we are talking about planning, about design, and site and social management. And this is something that the ISO CPTED standard also introduces and considers. In the South Hemisphere, we have applied the same principles, CPTED principles, like in the North Hemisphere. We call them the CPTED ADN principles, but in some cases, we name or we translate some words a bit different. For example, when we talk about community participation, that has to do much with CPTED second generation, that considers more the social architecture of communities, for example. We call in that way in the South Hemisphere, but I know and I have read as ICA president in other parts of the world, in Europe, guidelines, or in Canada, sometimes they talk about more the social capacity of cohesion, and they name that principle a bit different, but it's a very subtle difference. The most of the time we apply the same ADN principles, accepted principles ADN, than in the North Hemisphere. What is the difference is the way that communities perceive their environment. And because of that, we start a very interesting initiative in the year 2006 with a colleague that is also ICA director, Carlos Gutierrez Vera, who is the leader of the ICA School Committee, to understand how communities perceive their environment. We start developing the Cloud of Dream initiative and methodology. This is a diagnosis methodology tool that seeks to understand how children, and then we did it with more grown-up people, perceive their environment. And for us, it has been a super interesting way of gather subconscious information, very subtle information, and combine with all the information that we get applying the CPTED methodology. And for example, in this case, this was a little girl from Brazil, and we asked this girl in a school environment, how you dreamed your city? And she has dreamed a beach. Of course, she was in a city without water, without beach, and she had much problems of bullying inside of the school. So she was dreaming to moving out of the school. She was dreaming to escape from a very criminogenic environment. So this kind of information has been also very interesting in the Global South to complement what we are doing with CPTED. Another topic that has been very relevant in all our projects is the gender-focused approach, and mostly thinking about women's safety, how women feel safe in public space or in the environment. This is a project that we did with my team this year in Ecuador with the Guayaquil municipality, and we developed a bus stop for women, especially because women felt very much fear about sexual assaults. So it was very successful. Also, we propose safe routes for women, considering playgrounds, for example, because the most of the women goes in Latin America to the work with children. We have many families without men, so we have mothers with children, and we design this kind of spaces so they can stay in these spaces with the children. And also we propose this kind of community umbrellas, we call. They are super low budget with Wi-Fi, the idea was to gather young people together that all the time are looking for Wi-Fi connection. And so we can increase natural surveillance in the public spaces. All the information that we have done in so many projects in 24 years, applying CPTED methodology and combined with other strategies, have been systematized in many guidelines. We have developed many CPTED guidelines for municipalities, for governments. This is the guideline that we developed this year for the municipality in Guatemala, in Guayaquil. And here you can see another project. This project was in Quebrada La Cruz in Patagonia. And this was a very, very interesting project because we had a low budget and we started working together with community in a very participative approach, cleaning this space, 5-hectare space for a park, a public park, and we recover all these wheels to produce a safe routes. And the budget that we had, we use it to put lamps. And the fear perception of these people decreases much. Also, we plan in a very participative way with them, using modeling, for example, participative modeling, the way they wanted to recover their park. We start measuring all these interventions with some universities in Chile and together with UK, with Dr. Tim Pascoe, that is also ICA director. And we recognize that the fear perception has decreased in these interventions from 60.2% to 45.5%. It was a very interesting initiative. Also in Chile, we have been working very hard with different communities. For example, this is Villa Andes del Sur in Puente Alto borough, that is in the metropolitan region. Villa Andes del Sur has more elderly people, and they had many problems of mental health after the COVID pandemic. So we work with them different trauma situations, anger, they feel fear, they feel because of pandemic. How they have settled in the town, how they have built their houses, and this is the history of Villa Andes del Sur. The same happened, for example, when I worked in
Did we lose Maka, or is it just me?
Okay, I think it's Maka. I thought it was just me also.
Same.
Maka, we are losing your voice sometimes. So
Mexico,
Not
but it's very
is your internet a bit slow? Maybe switch off your video. Okay, we'll give us a second or two. Maka will join us soon.
Not a problem. Maybe while we are waiting, I could actually share a little bit of what's happening within Southeast Asia, if that's okay.
Please go ahead,
Yes.
Shamit.
So, first of all, welcome everyone. And on behalf of the ICA, I would just like to thank everyone for taking the time off on their Saturday to participate in this session and also to learn a little bit of what's going on in the Global South. So I'm Shamir. I'm based in Malaysia, and we are part of Southeast Asia. And maybe just to share a little bit, I'll share a little bit about what's going on in Malaysia and some of the other countries within Southeast Asia. So within Malaysia, CPTED has actually been around for a while, but it has not been, how would you say, enforced in any way. It was always just as part of the suggestion that, hey, this is part of the guidelines. You can include it, but it's not enforced. And then later on, what happened was the town plan council, they actually put it as part of the guideline, and then for any development to take place, they need to follow the CPTED guidelines. But when we reviewed the CPTED guidelines, it was actually very elementary to start off. On top of it being elementary, again, the enforcement agencies also were not well aware of what actually consists of CPTED. So they were very, they needed to first be educated what CPTED was before they could even enforce it. So what's been going on here is that there's been a lot of education on CPTED. And what we are hoping for is as time goes on, we can actually take some of the examples like what we've seen in some other countries which have very successfully adopted CPTED. You know, I had a very interesting chat with Professor Park from Korea, and CPTED has something that is it's something that's applied over in Korea, and what they have done is amazing, and they've managed to reduce crime by a tremendous amount. And what we are hoping is that in most parts of Malaysia, hopefully that would be the aim, that we would be able to achieve something of that sort. Then moving south of Malaysia, we've got Singapore. And Singapore actually applies CPTED to a very large extent. And they've got a lot of community safety activities, but also their developments are very well designed. Of course, in Southeast Asia, they are the smallest country, but their application on CPTED is very well designed. I think one of our participants over here, Beverly, she travels to Singapore maybe often, and I think she would attest very well that when you go to Singapore, you will feel safe. In fact, Singapore was awarded or recognized as the safest city in Southeast Asia for tourists by Forbes. There was a research done by Forbes, and they actually said Singapore is one of the safest cities you can travel to. But they have done it very well. Their walkways are amazing. You know, they've got large walkways, and it's very well lit. So when you're walking around at night, it doesn't feel scary. Whereas certain parts of Malaysia, I would have to say, because of how we've designed our walkways and maybe the lack of lighting, that it does feel a bit worrying when you're walking alone at night. But yeah, Singapore has done very well. And moving south of that, we've got Indonesia. And Indonesia is a very, very large country. And then they've got many islands, very similar to Philippines as well. Too many islands, right? But the thing is with Indonesia, is that especially if you're in the capital, Jakarta, the CBD is actually very well designed in terms for pedestrians, but nonetheless, traffic is terrible in that part of the world. And sometimes just because of the traffic as well, it does lead to other sorts of crime. So that's the one thing that I think has probably been in Indonesia, but Indonesia is still not very familiar with CPTED, to say. They've not really applied it. There's a lot of potential. Some different areas of Indonesia is starting to look into CPTED CPTED. And of course, the one thing that's beautiful about Indonesia is that there's so much potential to actually apply it. But I have to say, also in addition to that, I'd just like to share a little bit about the Philippines as well, because we've done quite a bit of work over there. And Philippines has been very open to CPTED. There's been a lot of research on CPTED. And certain parts of Philippines have adopted it actually. And when you go into those areas, it feels very safe, very nice. But again, the problem with that is that it's only in certain areas, and it's very expensive in those areas. So the cost of living is expensive there, food is expensive in those areas. So I think the question also goes back with, and I think this would be a good conversation to have with Maka and Manjari, is that does having a safe area also come with an expensive price, right? Because when we look at the areas, even in Malaysia and Singapore, as a Malaysian, I feel Singapore is expensive for me, but just our currency. But nonetheless, I think Singaporeans don't find it that expensive. But certain parts of Philippines, which are very well designed, it's expensive. Certain parts of Indonesia, which is very well designed, is expensive. Same with Malaysia as well. Certain parts of Malaysia, which is very well designed and very safe, feels very expensive. So that would be a question that maybe I think would be good for discussion, is that should safety come with that price? Or is there a way that we can actually reduce the cost and say, hey, no, safety doesn't need to be just expensive. It can be affordable or maybe cheap, but yet it comes with that price where we value that safety and fear. There is less fear of crime. I think that would be one of the other things as well. So yeah, maybe that's just a rough introduction of a little bit of what's happening in Southeast Asia. I will pass this back on to the panel, to our panelists, and also I think Maka, sorry, I think due to the connection earlier, you did not finish your presentation. So back to you.
Thank you, dear Shamil. Yes, I had a lapsus of connection, but no problem. I am still connected now, and thank you for taking over, Shamir. Now, just to close my presentation, my idea, I wanted to highlight that due to budget, we have been very creative. Mentioning what you are talking about budget, we have done interventions that are very subtle and very tiny interventions, but with a very big impact in crime prevention and crime reduction that we could measure. But also we have done very big interventions. The last one that I was presenting was a community center in Mexico, in Colonia Terremoto, that was founded by the Inter-American Development Bank. So we have done different type of intervention depending on the client, depending on the case also, and also the budget. And we have discovered in all these 45 years of application that CPTED, when it is well applied in a very scientific way based on evidence, has very good results. This has been our main discovery. But also that we need to involve political authorities, for example. It has been very crucial to involve mayors in the CPTED project in the South Hemisphere. It has been very crucial to involve police officers, for example, and to teach them about CPTED. This has been something very, very relevant.
Then,
Thank
Maka,
you.
if I just ask a little bit more
Yeah,
with
yeah,
that.
go ahead, Shamir.
You all have quite successful. Two things that I maybe like to, maybe as a two-part question. I think looking at myself and what happens in Southeast Asia, I would say the reason why Singapore probably has one of the best applications is, of course, it's well designed, but two is that people are disciplined over there. Is that if they cannot do that, they don't do it. That's law, and they're very strict about it. Like nobody chews chewing gum because you cannot chew chewing gum in there. Like nobody eats on the train because you cannot. But I think in other parts of Southeast Asia, maybe there has been maybe a bit of lack of discipline. The rules are there, but people tend to bend it. That's one. The other thing, when it comes to costing, and maybe Maka, you'll have a lot of experience in, and maybe Manjari as well, maybe you share your opinion on this, is that when it comes to costing, is what happens is that when an area, the application of CPTED can be done at a very affordable rate. But when that area becomes safe, suddenly property prices skyrocket. And then now that area is not cheap to live at anymore. When the property price is expensive, the food in that area goes up because people believe there's spending power. The cost of everything goes up in that area. So how do we then regulate that or ensure that, look, this place can be safe and yet it's not going to get expensive? Of course, for most people who are property owners, they would want their property prices to appreciate, but then that area becomes an area which is now too high cost for the residents. And what happens with that? Then it goes back to the whole cycle of, okay, then suddenly crime happens back again because people cannot afford the maintenance of that space. So yeah, I would love to hear your opinion, the both of you, on regarding this.
Okay, so firstly, I'll thank both Maka and Shamir for their opening statements. And just to put in my 2 bits to what is being discussed, see, I think the important thing here and the important part of the topic which needs to be understood is we are talking about CPTED in the global south. Now, typically, global south is defined as those countries or that part of the world which are less developed than the others, and may also be located in the southern hemisphere. Now, typically, there are a lot of countries in the southern hemisphere which do not qualify as global south, say Australia, New Zealand. And there are countries which are in the northern hemisphere typically, but they are more a part of the global south, like India, for instance. So when we're talking global south, we're talking about countries which are less developed, and obviously they are less developed because they have socio-economic challenges. They could be, middle income or lower income countries of the world. So it is obvious that there, because of the socio-economics, there would be a kind of the economics and the financials and the budgetary aspects are very, very critical. That is the reason, that is one of the major reasons which is stopping them from becoming the global north. So it's obvious, So, and in fact, it's an excellent overview you've given us, Shamir, of Southeast Asian countries. But if I was to take you a little more south in Asia, the South Asian countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, and such, we are countries. Obviously, we are poor countries, very poor countries, and we typically when we bring up the topics of day-to-day security and crime prevention as considerations, they are considered as luxuries. These are considered luxuries of the global north, where we are countries which are grappling with survivalistic questions of hunger and poverty and basic primal existence. So, in fact, in the beginning, in the initial days, when we kind of brought in the subject of CPTED, or crime prevention and security, I'm an architect, and when I brought it before my jury for my doctoral question, it was like it's not that important. We're looking at more existential issues, but now things are changing. They understand it, of course, there is a lot of political will associated, and there is a lot of political motivation that is required. But what is being understood is that security, crime prevention, and being fear of crime is now being recognized as a developmental prerequisite. And when we're looking at alleviating poverty or alleviating hunger by creating jobs, by strengthening our economies, and creating all those kind of vocations, then it is being understood that you can't have foreign direct investments and you cannot have economic progress or development if you don't offer a secure environment for anything to kind of flourish and prosper. So in that context, I think Global South has many challenges. Having said that, and having been one of the people who has kind of introduced the concept of CPTED into the Indian policy making and the urban development context, I can tell you that CPTED, by the very name CPTED, may be new to our culture and our communities, but the concepts and the theories are deep seated in our traditions and in our history and in our heritage. So in fact, community policing and the community-based security tools and instruments which are being followed today by CPTED and the Global North in their developmental mechanisms is actually very commonplace and very, very, should I say, taken for granted in our culture. I can speak of the Indian, Pakistani, Sri Lankan to some extent, Bangladeshi context for sure. So, so I mean, this is something that probably people are turning to our cultures to kind of understand from. So it's not new in that sense, but it is new in the kind of new guise that it has come forward for. And of course, very importantly, it was to a large extent forgotten, or should I say, not given as much importance or priority in the developmental outlook, which is kind of trying to creep back in. So I'll rest there and I'll go to Maka, who has raised her hand. And please, Maka, go ahead.
Thank you, dear Manjari. I was reflecting deeply many things regarding my CPTED practice that has to do with the Global South Hemisphere. I was thinking, for example, why an architect from Latin America, from Chile, became the ICA president. It is a very good question because I am younger than other board members that could be president, but why me? And I was thinking and reflecting about that for many years ago. And then I realized that the common factor that brings me to be the ICA president, and that is something that you mentioned in some way now, we are talking about community resilience. What makes us as Global South actors connected? What connects us? We need to be resilient because our Global South Hemisphere suffers of poverty, suffers of much crime. We suffer all the time. So if we don't be extreme creative, if we don't be extreme resilient, we cannot move forward. And in that sense, I have seen the projects, for example, that I have seen in South Korea. I was invited by the police force 1 month ago to represent the ICA. And I have seen so much creativity put on the place in CPTED projects in India, of course, when I was in Delhi. In South Africa, when I visit Tinus and some of the projects there. And in Chile, creativity and resilience is a key factor that I think it's part of the conversation today of this webinar.
Absolutely. Very well said, Maka. Very well said. So actually, that was the first panel question that we had thought that we will discuss about. I will still touch upon it so that if any of you want to add something, we can still do that. But the basic question that we need to first understand is the very fact that we're having this webinar. I mean, do you think the CPTED concepts or the CPTED action or the CPTED principles, are they different? Do they vary between global north and global south, or do you think they remain the same? So I'll take this question first to Shamir, and then I'll come to you, Maka.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe before I answer the question, I just like to tell Maka the reason why she's president is also because she does a very good job as a president. So yeah, for those of you that don't know, Maka's amazing president. So that's why for many years, and many years to come, we'll probably be there as well.
So lovely, Shamir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. But maybe to answer, is there a difference? And you ask culturally, is there a difference, right? In terms of separate.
Anyway. Not necessarily culturally. You tell me if there is a difference, and then we'll figure out why the difference. First question is there a difference? Is there a difference between CPTED for the global north and CPTED for the global south?
Definitely. I think one of the largest things that play a factor in the application or why there is a difference is mainly due to cultural differences. Even if you don't even look at global north and global south, let's just look at global south as a whole, right? What's happening in maybe Maka's area, which is successful there, doesn't mean it's going to be successful here in Malaysia or in India, right? How we act, how we think, how crime happens is very different. So as a criminologist, even within Southeast Asia, I've seen, we've traveled throughout Southeast Asia, and even then we've seen the same type of crime is committed in many different ways because of culture and just the terrain is different geographically, everything is different. So if crime is different, the same type of crime, theft, is done differently. So the applications to prevent theft using CPTED has to be different. So I think that is one of the things, right? Just because we are culturally different and how we do things which are very different leads to why it's very important to always localize CPTED. We always say CPTED is a global system, but it has to be localized, right? It's a thing that can be done in any country, in any platform, but it always has to be localized to the area, right? So that's one of the things I think which would definitely I would definitely say it's different everywhere.
Totally agree, Shamir, with you. And just to connect, I think because of that, the umbrella initiative is growing and growing, because the idea was to really highlight the local work of local groups of CPTED practitioners, because who else knows better what is happening there? What is the crime problem there? How communities are organized? Who are the community leaders, for example? So because of that, the umbrella initiative has been designed as a very organic and synergic structure that seeks to connect different groups that are working locally and based on context. And that is very relevant, what you say, Shamir.
Yeah, and just to add on to what Maka is saying, for those of you who are tuned in and you're not familiar with what Maka means by the ICA umbrella initiative, please do get in touch with us. We will we would like to tell you what it is. And like what Maka says, right? The reason why we have an umbrella initiative by the ICA is so that we understand what is going on in different areas, and which is shared by the local chapters itself. If not, the ICA is all about sharing information and us learning from each other. And without such an initiative, we will not know what's going on in different parts of the world by the locals itself. Then it's all just based on assumption. And when it's just based on assumption, the information is never accurate. So yeah, so if you're not familiar with what the umbrella initiative is, please get in touch with the ICA, and we will definitely get in touch with you and give you information on what it is.
So Maka did mention it in her presentation also. So Maka, what are your thoughts? Do you think global and north and south, the CPTED varies? It's different or it's the same?
I think varies a little in some accents. For example, I was very happy to hear Elizabeth Miller's presentation this year in a webinar talking about municipal governance. And Elizabeth Miller is the ICA secretary, and she's a very experienced CPTED practitioner. She works in the municipality of Saskatoon in Canada. And I was so surprised to hear Elizabeth's comments about how the Saskatoon municipality has implemented CPTED since 1992. And I was happy and surprised with that, because the way they implement CPTED is the same way as we implement that in the South. But, for example, the robust and the maturity of the governance of a municipality is 20 years ahead of what's happening in Latin America. So the way of implementing is the same, but the context and, for example, the government that is the partner, and the most of the time with whom we apply CPTED are different. So the most of the time, the way is the same, but the context differs much. The same happens in Europe, for example.
So I'll just add my 2 bit to it. Yes, this has been actually a thrust of a lot of my work and research initially, is to understand whether, the developed concepts of CPTED really are applicable in India. And I found that there are some strategic differences. For example, most of our CPTED principles are based around creating populatedness, to make sure places are not lonely, there are eyes on the street. Whereas in India, we are actually dealing with exactly the opposite. We're trying to underpopulate places. Most places are overpopulated, overcrowded, and we have actually the reverse conditions very often. But the beauty is that most CPTED principles align very, very simply with the different contexts, and that I think is, according to me, the strength of CPTED principles, that they are so universal that they adapt from context to context. The other difference being that, yes, like I've already said, the socioeconomic aspects and limitations and constraints. Besides that, I think one very important factor is the difference in the governance. Like, for example, that's one of the things that I'm facing in India is the logjam, because we don't have municipalities controlling their own structure and being able to implement CPTED. It's a more top-down thing where you have to go through the central system and get it accepted at the central national level for it to percolate down into the municipal level. So those are probably differences which may not be so much due to global north or south as it would be from governance point of view. But one aspect definitely which I've already stated earlier is the factor that yes, budgets are tight, priorities are heavily laden with existential issues, where security and things like crime prevention get relegated to luxuries almost. So those are the factors where I would say yes, that there are differences while keeping the overall jacket of CPTED as a constant. Okay, so I'll come to the second question. I think we've lost Shamir briefly. We'll hopefully he'll be joining us soon enough. And let's talk about in your specific regions. Maka, right now there's just you and me. We'll wait for Shamir to join us back. But in your specific region, what do you think are the challenges you have faced, or one is likely to face in practicing CPTED, which you would attribute maybe to being a part of the global south?
Thank you, Manyari. It's a very good question. The first challenge is to teach the people, the inhabitants of my region, that we need to have a very scientific approach to environmental criminology and crime prevention strategies. Because the most of the time in Latin America, the decision has been made more on political basis than technical basis. So the first thing that I always need to work very hard on and to try to change is the understanding of evidence-based approach practices. This is something very, very relevant. The second is that we need to work in a very specific way with vulnerable groups. We have many vulnerable groups in my region. For example, women are victims of sexual assaults and also murder. We have much feminicide in my region, unfortunately, of women in Mexico, in Ecuador, in all around. We have violence against women and homicide against women. So we have been working in a very scientific way how to do, for example, CPTED diagnosis that take the picture of the phenomena that make women be victim of crime, and to understand how environmental variables connect with that problem and try to solve through public policies that problem. This is something totally innovative in my region, but we have been working with UN Habitat, for example, with UN Women, with that, and many other interesting partners. The other point is that for sustainability purpose, we always make much emphasis on training. We try to transfer training, CPTED training with accredited courses, CAP accredited courses by ICA to municipalities, to private sector, so then can move forward by themselves, then applying CPTED methodology, but accredited by ICA. I think these three main points are very critical and crucial in my region.
Sorry. Thanks, Maka. Thanks for that quick summary. I have a message from Shamir. He had an issue and he's just trying to connect back. In the meanwhile, before I get down to my summation, I'll just request Terence and Beverly to please post your questions, if there are questions, in the Q&A box, because it's otherwise difficult to make out when you are just making a comment or when you want to ask a question. And if it's a question, it would be nice if you can mention who, if there is a particular panelist you want to address that to. Okay, so Shamir is back. Shamir, I'll just introduce you to the question that Maka just answered. I'll go on with answering while you can make up your answer. So my question to the panel was, what are the specific challenges of practicing CPTED in your specific region? So I'll just add to what Maka has just kind of put in as her thoughts. I totally agree that there are these challenges of governance and things like that. It's pretty similar in India. CPTED as a recognizable concept is in a fledgling, if I can say fledgling or infantile state. People are just about coming around to the idea that, oh, you can design out crime, or that the urban crimes against women or gender-based crimes that most of our cities, especially Delhi, is very, very infamously struggling with. It's a Herculean task almost to tell people that it's got a lot to do with a lot of things that are wrong in our urban design or in our urban development strategies, but they are coming around to it. So we can say that it's at a fledgling stage. But having said that, like I said, under a plethora of other priorities which are more existential. Secondly, political will. You see, generally security does not make for a great vote election issue. So far. So all those things, yes, they are struggling with. But on the plus side, I can say that it's the grassroots solutions that we seem to be coming up with. For example, we've had some terrorist hits and blasts across the cities in the past, not recently, but further back in our past. And in a bid to kind of solve those issues, the local governments came up with a lot of knee-jerk solutions, which are actually all CPTED based ideas, like neighborhood watch scheme and those kind of participatory initiatives. So I say that CPTED concepts and principles are so embedded in our psyche and in our traditional and heritage ways that we don't really have to work very hard to kind of, it's not something which is shockingly new. It's pretty much common sense and something that maybe all of the elders of a community get together and that's the solution they would find. And you would find that it totally aligns with the CPTED principles, so to say. So there are challenges, yes, which are, culturally or whatever wise relate, but yes, there are solutions too. So with that, I'll now quickly shift my focus to Shamir to hear what he has to say on this.
Yeah, thank you very much. So there are a few things which actually probably hinder the proper growth of CPTED, right? One of it is, and this was very shocking to me when I found that in Malaysia, what happened was whenever CPTED wanted to be applied or there were meetings by the local councils to apply CPTED, the police is invited to share crime and the statistics, but they are not invited to be part of the design team. So I thought that was very interesting because my opinion on that was actually the police would actually be good people to have as part of the design team. You've got the architects, you've got the engineers. I'm called in as a criminologist, but very interesting, the police were not called in to look at the designs, which I think they should be more involved in because they would probably understand it a bit better on what designs would work and what design might not work. Even the other department, which was not very much involved, was actually the fire department, which I think is very important as well to be part of the CPTED design team. The other thing I think which also sometimes becomes a bit of an issue is costing and who bears that cost. Right? Is it the end user? Is it the local government? Is it the private sector? If the local government, who? Is it the police department? Is it the municipal council? Is it the town plan council? Or so many of the questions, right? Everybody wants to try to push the cost to somebody else. And on top of that, the cost of maintenance. Who bears that cost now? Right? Do the taxpayers now have to pay additional tax with that increase? And of course, with private property developers, to them, if they were to apply CPTED, because to them that's additional cost involved, you need consultants, then you need designers and all to it, then that cost goes back to the home buyers, right? So then suddenly property prices have skyrocketed again. And I think the other thing which is also a bit of an issue is the discipline that we have. These features are sometimes put in place, CPTED features are put in place, but we don't have the discipline to maintain them or to use them in accordance to what they're designed for. That's also another issue which probably needs to be resolved. And I do agree with I missed out what Maka said, but I do agree with Manjari is that a lot of things actually, if you look back at how things were done culturally, you talk about communal safety and all, these are things which it's interesting because if you look back 50 years ago, it's probably safer than what it is now. And why is it when we had less technology, why is it that it was safer? It's just that, people actually looked out for each other. There was a bit more value in what we did and a bit more value in the trust we had for our neighbors. Now, in the city, you hardly know your neighbors. So I do agree with what Manjari said, if you just take a little bit of that community spirit and community building efforts, and I think that would be a very good start to any CPTED initiative. All of us would agree that any CPTED application would require the community to be part of it, to be able to maintain it, and also to be able to sustain it and develop from there. So yeah, that will probably be my 2 cents on this.
Thanks, Shamir. So I'll just take the last question for the panel discussion, and then we have a Q&A box which is already filling up. So we'll quickly go to all the questions you're posting. Keep putting them in there. We will address them as many as time permits. So quickly, we come to the third consideration in our discussion today. And I'll start again with Mecca. Mecca, how and to what extent do you think CPTED can contribute to the global south? And in the specific, in the additional focused aspect of attainment of the UN SDGs, what do you think is going to be CPTED's contribution to the global south?
I think it's huge. This has been my experience based on evidence because we have measured the past years. We have done and developed impact evaluation models of CPTED interventions. So I can say based on evidence that the impact is huge. But we have seen with Dr. Tim Pascoe that the major decrease of crime indicators in a CPTED intervention comes out when you combine CPTED interventions with other crime prevention interventions. For example, interventions with young people, interventions with family, more social interventions. So always when we apply CPTED, we have a kind of degree, for example, in crime indicators of fear perception. But when you combine it, it is bigger, the decrease of crime and fear. But also, it is very relevant what you mentioned with the UN SDG, because we started with you, Manjari, and Tinus Kruger also, and Dr. Tim Pascoe, because of the evidence we gather, an agreement together with UN. This agreement, we hope it will be finished for next year. It will cover many areas of different initiatives. For example, the 100 Cities initiative that we will highlight best practices of CPTED implementations in different cities. We will pick 10 cities in the world that can be showcased, for example, and we will work also the online CPTED course that we are launching from ICA level together with the UN. So many initiatives will be covered together with UN, and because of the connection with the SDGs, as you mentioned, we started this endeavor, this initiative, and I hope it will bring us to very new and innovative fields of CPTED application.
Thank you, Mecca. Your thoughts, Shamir?
Sorry, would you mind just repeating what was the question again?
The question is, how do you think CPTED can contribute to the global south, especially in the context of the achievement of the UN SDGs?
Oh, okay. I think there is actually so much of space for CPTED to be applied, especially within, and I speak for my experience here in Malaysia and certain parts of Southeast Asia. I think there's just so much that needs to be done. But I think even before we can get to doing that, we have to be very open to the idea that, hey, this thing has worked in other parts of the world. We just have to localize it a bit more and apply it here. Of course, all of us are looking into the UN SDGs and how that can be part of it. Sustainability is one of the biggest things that people talk about, but also a lot of parts about, human rights and all. And I think what's happening over here is that we have looked at those aspects, but now we just need to see how we can insert CPTED as part of those, right? And I think with the right people, the right policymakers in those spaces who are maybe a bit more, who maybe have understood CPTED a bit better, if we have those right policymakers there, then it can be applied. But if the policymakers are not aware of what it is, then it's not going to be applied.
Okay, thank you, Shamir. So I'll just add my little bit to it. So yes, according to me, the UN SDGs are basically sustainable developmental goals, as the name suggests, but they are largely hinged on making life sustainable, development sustainable. So, and how they align with CPTED is they are basically looking at the utopian goals of no hunger, decent work, equitability, gender equity, those kind of things. And CPTED being an enabler in the sense that prevention of crime and prevention of fear of crime is a primary ingredient, should I say, to all of these virtues. For example, if we were to say very simplistically, if CPTED is able to prevent crime, which means crimes against women, gender-based crimes, then obviously there'll be more women coming forward, contributing to the economy, and directly or indirectly, it will lead to gender equity. If we talk about the sustainable goal where it says decent work, then obviously decent work means being able to go to work and come back and earn your livelihood without the fear of crime. If you look at any kind of development, security, like I said earlier, is a infrastructural prerequisite. You cannot have development, you cannot have economic progress if you don't have basic urban security for your people living there. Similarly, so if you're able to live without fear, if you're able to work without fear, if you're able to contribute to society, then obviously you will be earning yourself a livelihood. Obviously, there will be no hunger, there will be no poverty. So it's all kind of intertwined. They are so basic, and we already know prevention of crime and prevention of fear of crime are basic to human existence. They are, the first brick in the sustainability building. You cannot talk about climate sustainability without talking about socio-economic sustainability. So, environmental sustainability is as important as social sustainability or economic sustainability, and social and economical sustainability cannot exist without crime prevention and fear of crime. So, according to me, they are working for each other. They are working with each other, and they are definitely not, they are made for each other. Let's just go to the extent of saying that. All right, so those were our panel discussions, and I am very happy to open the Q&A box now and immediately dive into the first question that I see is from a friend of mine, Terence Love, from Australia. He's asking us a very interesting question. I've read this before. I have a feeling it's meant for me, but anybody on the panel can kind of answer it if they want to. One issue I'm seeing, I'm reading from Terry's question. One issue I'm seeing in some areas of Global South is violence, including murder related to violent fundamentalist religion. This includes religious violence by police forces and encouraged by members of government. How do the panelists consider is the best ways of using the 10 separate methods to reduce this widespread criminality? Does it need a new kind of process not yet included in the ISO standard? Would anybody want to take that question? Maybe Shamir, it applies to your area too.
Actually, in Malaysia, we don't have that issue. From young, Malaysia is a Muslim country, but it's pretty harmonious over here. We don't have that issue. I'm not a Muslim, but yet we don't have that issue because from young, we've been all exposed to all the different religions. And what that has done is that has created a lot of tolerance because we understand what would be those what are sensitive things, so we avoid those things, right? So unfortunately, we don't have that issue over here. I think maybe, I'm not sure, Manjari and Maka, if you have that issue in your part of the world.
I would say, Shamir, not unfortunately. Fortunately, you don't have that issue in your part of the world.
Yes, fortunately, we don't. We have other issues, but that's not one of it. Yes, fortunately.
Maka, do you have an answer to that?
We have seen in Chile, at least since 2019, a change in social movements that are very complicated to confront. For example, in 2019, we had a social unrest movement that was critical for the government. It took place on public spaces all around the country, and we have seen no tolerance among people, haters, much violence on streets. Sometimes the roots are from different religious opposition. Sometimes they just express anger. And the way we confront that and we deal with that was helping, for example, and teaching some police officers in Chile how to apply CPTED principles with social crowd management and how you can work improving natural surveillance in public spaces so you can predict in a more accurate way what a crowd will do if the situation goes to a very violent scenario. Things like that. This has been our experience, unfortunately, the past 5 years here in my country.
Thanks, Maka. So I will add my bit. Yes, I think I have a feeling that the question was a lot to do with the Indian political climate, where we have struggled with ideological terrorism from different religions. It started with Sikh-based terrorism when I was a child, and now there are other forms of ideological terrorism across the world. And what we're seeing now is some of, like our current government has its own fundamental and its own non-secular ideologies. Now, I don't think, you see, these are seasonal, should I say, flavors which change from time to time based on popular swings that are more, electoral based. So they are more for elections, more for political gains. And it's not, I won't say that the public at large remains unaffected by these rhetorics. Yes, there are sways, there are a lot of movements that and there are a lot of excesses and atrocities which are committed probably in the garb of religion or political movements. But that is not necessarily the thinking of the entire populace, number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, in that context, I feel that the accepted second generation concepts of social control and community cohesion and community participation is what really comes to the fore. And of course, you can't take away from the basic concept of CPTED, which are those the situational crime prevention of the basic tenets. They remain the same, come what may. But to say that, we develop something in CPTED that would be able to address politically designed rhetorics, I'm not really sure. If we can, I would be very happy to change the way things are going currently. But as history has shown, if you really go down and if you ask any political scientist, my daughter being one, these are all, they have a shelf life, these rhetorics or these kind of hate-driven political movements have a life of their own. They die either their own death or people grow out of them. So I think what is finally at the living and at the grassroots level is the community and the human to human interaction that communities have, which is probably the strength of CPTED. So I hope, Terence, we've answered your question. We've tried, but it will be nice if we can continue this conversation besides this, beyond this webinar. All right, so I'll quickly move to the second question for the day, which is from Beverly Roach. She writes, I am very interested in Dr. Macarena's reference to gender-based concepts in CPTED implementation, as fear of crime for women has its own nuances. Could we hear a little more in this regard, some examples and how effective they have been? Maca, I guess that's for you. Please go ahead and answer.
Thank you for the question. We have done much research about how women feel in public spaces and how what are their fears in Latin America. And we have discovered, for example, if we apply a survey asking them how much fear do you feel to be victim of crime in this space, and we apply that survey to men and women in the same space, women with a scale from 1 to 10, being 10 the most level of fear, for example, women, the most of the time, the answers are from 8, 9, and 10 level of fear of crime. And men, the most of the time, are 4, 5, and 6. And this situation has repeated in many countries, in many samples of surveys and research. So based on evidence, it has been very interesting to discover that women are the best thermometer of fear perception in public space. And this is based on evidence, as I said. This has lead us and drive us to propose different approaches of CPTED implementation for women's fear perception. And we, for example, do a CPTED diagnosis and with men and women, and we apply a filter. Then after we have the complete sample, we apply a filter to understand better what women feels. And then we compare with men. And then we propose holistic interventions that take on account men's needs, but also women's needs. And most of the time, they are totally different. For example, men's and young men, they prefer play soccer and soccer fields than women that prefer very nice places in public space with shadow, with some trees, with plants. The environmental needs of both groups are very different. So since we started doing this kind of work, for example, with UN women in Mexico, in Zacatecas, we did a nice project in 2021 of safe routes for women in the state of Zacatecas. We could apply all these ideas with very interesting results. The fear perception of women decreases after we have done the projects together with the government of Zacatecas, for example. And the examples are many. I wrote the first CPTED guide for women. I was very surprised that never before me had wrote that guide. That is something so simple. And this guide amalgamates all the strategies and experience that we have done the last 5 years. You can find and download it for free in the app Academia.
Thank you, Mecca. I hope, Beverly, that answers your question and you got a further insight into what Mecca was meaning to say. So quickly, I'll go to the next question because I guess this will be our last question for the day. Again, it's Dr. Love, Terence from Australia, Perth. Worldwide, we are seeing a shift away from the crime types focused on individuals, residences, and their vehicles, for which CPTED was originally developed. The crime shift is towards retail theft, fraud, money laundering, red-collar crime, and belief-based crimes. How do you feel that CPTED might change to address these changes in the global south? Does it need new or different CPTED methods? Who would want to take that? Shamir?
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much, Dr. Terence. This is a very interesting question. I think a lot of us have been also looking into the shift in crime, especially from street crime and property crime towards you're looking at commercial crime, right? We're talking about white-collar crime, red-collar crime, and all. In all honesty, I think the focus of CPTED might need a little bit of a shift, especially when we are talking about fraud. I think retail theft pretty much can still use CPTED principles. You see a lot of IDs, interior designers and all, designing the retail outlets in certain ways. Of course, mainly it's to get you to buy more stuff, but it's also designed in a way where retail theft might not be the easiest. But I think when it comes to fraud, money laundering and all, I think there has to be a different approach to it. I think the general principles that we're talking about in terms of just the current principles of CPTED, in my personal opinion, it might not be enough, especially when we look at how complex fraud can get. If fraud is not complex, then those guys are not doing it right, to say. But at this point of time, I think it would need a bit of a shift. And of course, if you have any idea on what those shifts are, I would love to have a chat with you at any point of time.
Thanks, Shamir. And I would say, yes, CPTED is an evolving concept. It's an evolving methodology. Obviously, as crimes change and evolve, CPTED's got to evolve. As society evolves, as life evolves, we will have to grow just like we've grown from first to second, and we are on the brink of the third generation. Who knows, these will have to form a part of the third, fourth, fifth, whatever generation of CPTED. Yes, so yes, I totally get where you're coming from, Terence. We've got to evolve and we've got to take these conversations more seriously and probably document them. So I will invite you to do that. I know you are, you write profusely, so it's like, go ahead. We would love to hear your thoughts on this and take that forward. With that, I think I have to take permission from my panel to start summing up. Your closing thoughts, please. I'll start with Shamir first and then go to Mecca. Shamir.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for all those who have attended today's session and those who have actually posed some questions and all. Very interesting questions. And I think it took the conversation in a very interesting way as well. Again, to some of the participants as well, at any point of time, if you'd like to work on anything with regards to CPTED, I think anyone on the ICA panel or the ICA family would be more than happy to contribute and even to sit down and work together with you on it. And I think just to maybe sum up what we've shared over here, and again, like I said, I speak from the area of a bit of Southeast Asia. There's been a lot going on around here. There have been some good practices and a lot of areas that need to be improved. But I think, again, with the right policymakers and with the right mindset, we should be able to head in the right direction. But it will require a lot of work from a lot of parties. And I think as long as our vision of just achieving a safer nation is there, I think we would not be able, we will not be having that problem. So again, I just like to thank everyone and the ICA family for organizing this.
Maka, your closing remarks.
Yes, I want to thank you also, dear Manjari, for leading the webinar committee, Tino, Shamir, and all the attendees for the incredible questions. We say always that we are the CPTED family, and each member of the family is unique and very relevant. So because of your question, this webinar has been very interactive, very interesting, and very Global South. I like that very much because you focus positively on what is happening here in the Global South. So thank you for that. And just to highlight that we will have our big encounter next year in Palm Springs. So don't lose the opportunity to gather in person all together. This is a unique opportunity to know from each other more about CPTED with all your different inputs from different regions of the world. We will be waiting for you. See you soon, I hope.
Thank you, Maka. Thank you, Shamir. And I will also thank all the viewers. And the beauty, just as Maka was saying this and Shamir was saying this, I realized that most of the questions that we've had today are from the global north. So they are from developed countries, and they have so much interest in us in the global, us poor global southern. And it's nice to have this interaction. It's nice to have this wonderful family looking out for each other. Our effort is to include more and more of the Global South into the International CPTED Association. We've got very, very little representation from the Global South. We've got very little membership from the Global South, but we have strength in numbers. And the amazing part is that in the executive committee of 4 people, or say 5 people, we have 3 which come from the Global South. So that kind of talks to the strength of the Global South within the ICA. And I would invite more and more participation of the Global South in ICA. And we can tell you that CPTED stands to benefit Global South probably more than the Global North because of our socioeconomic constraints, because of the tight budgets and the hostile circumstances that most of the time we are dealing with. CPTED is the way forward for most of Global South. And with that, I will call it a close and thank all our viewers and participants today, all those who posted questions or are going to be listening to this recording after we finish. And it's back to our executive director and technical head for this webinar. Tinis, it's over to you. Thank you, everybody. Have a Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year from ICA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manjari, and to the panel members. I really enjoyed listening to this because, as you've mentioned, I'm from South Africa, so I'm also part of the Global South, and I have a very keen interest in this. But we have to end the webinar, and I just want to remind you again of the conference, and there you can see the URL, the address to get to the conference. If you want to join and you have more questions, please let us know. Please complete the survey to tell us a little bit more about what you thought of this webinar. We really appreciate the feedback. If you're not a member, please join us. We will really look forward to getting more people, especially from the Global South. You are also welcome to get certified either as a person or your course certified. Please, there's the address on the screen. If you need anything, we're on social media. You can contact us. And with that, I say thank you very much. And yes, enjoy the rest of the day.